Okay, everybody, pay attention. The reason that this lecture exists at all is because Boeing and Airbus are the two largest, by overwhelming margins, the largest aircraft manufacturers in the world. So whether you are going to be a pilot or an aviation maintenance technician, or you're going to be an air traffic controller, or whatever it is you might want to do in aviation, if you decide aviation is your career, you are going to encounter these two manufacturers, their engines, their technology, their aircraft. So we're going to show a little bit about that. If we don't get done by 5 to 3, then we'll continue it tomorrow morning before the exam, before the quiz. So there are major manufacturers, but Boeing and Airbus are by far the biggest. Embraer out of Brazil manufactures small little regional jets. So does Bombardier in Canada. They both manufacture small twin-engine regional type jets. That is, they don't go very far and they don't carry a lot of passengers. But as I said, the overwhelming number of aircraft sold worldwide are Boeing and Airbus. There are others besides the four listed there, but they are very small and not significant in the marketplace. In aircraft competition, Boeing and Airbus compete on models of aircraft. That is, Boeing doesn't compete with their smallest and Airbus with their largest. They compete on almost the same level in terms of aircraft size, range, number of engines, passengers carried. So the first thing we're going to look at is the comparison between Boeing 737 and Airbus A320. And that's important because those are the two largest used aircraft in the world. For example, Southwest Airlines has 700 737s. So do a lot of the other airlines have many, many 737s, and they also have the Airbus A320. They're very, very comparable aircraft. So let's take a look at the Boeing 737. I'm showing these pictures not necessarily because you're going to remember what each one looked like, but there are going to be some differences that I'm going to show you over the next 5 different aircraft types. And the differences, when I show you, they'll be obvious to you. But for the time being, just appreciate the fact that that happens to be a Boeing 737. Maybe if you've ever taken a commercial flight somewhere, you might very well have been on a Boeing 737 or an A320. They are that common. There are probably 4,000 or 5,000 of them flying each on each airline. Each manufacturer has at least that many flying in the world. So here's the Airbus A320. The tail is painted for the German airline Lufthansa. And they're very, very similar. There's not a great deal to talk about because they are almost identical in passengers carried. They are identical in engines. They are identical in the type of wings that they use. So you just keep in the back of your mind that if you want to make a comparison really quickly, or if I said to you on a quiz, what two aircraft are so common that they are routinely compared with one another, the only answer you would give me at that point in time would be the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. I happen to know very good friends of mine who have been captains on both of those aircraft. And later on in the presentation, today or tomorrow, we'll talk about the differences between, and I'll show you the cockpits of the two of them so you can appreciate the difference. Okay, the Boeing 747 versus A380. Do you recall where we encountered the Boeing 747 before in one of my lectures? Tenerife, right? Where the two Boeing 747s collided on the runway at Tenerife. So the Boeing, up until the time Airbus came out with their 380, the Boeing 747 was the largest airliner in the sky. The difference is that when Airbus made the decision to build something to compete with the 747, they decided to make it larger. Here's the 747, again in the Lufthansa colors. And I want to point out to you that the upper deck is right there, but it doesn't extend all the way down the fuselage. It's only that portion there. Okay. Let's compare that with the A380. Now the A380 has an upper deck, but it's the entire length of the aircraft. So this is truly a double-decker aircraft. Pardon? Because at the time, there was not a need for a completely double-deck airliner. In fact, you're going to find this out later on in my presentation, Airbus made a big billion-dollar mistake in creating that kind of an aircraft. So one of the things about Boeing, they are so cleverly smart about marketing, about being able to say, what will the airline industry want in the next 15 to 20 years? And they have been right time after time. It's amazing how they can forecast that far in advance because it takes that long to build, test, and get approval for an aircraft. Okay, the Boeing 767, that's been around a long, long time. Not as long as the 737, but it's been around a long time. And it's compared with the Airbus 330. Not a big comparison because they don't make either one of those aircraft anymore. They don't make 767s. I think they've stopped the production line on that, as well as the A330. But you'll see that it's pretty difficult to tell. It happens to be a wide body, whereas the 737 and the A320 are considered narrow bodies. That means there's only one aisle down the center of the aircraft with 3 seats on each side. In the 767, there are probably 2 aisles with maybe 3 seats in the middle, 2 on the window on each side. So that's the Boeing 767. And here's the Airbus A330. The only slight difference you might have noticed are what are called the winglets. The winglets are these little things up here on the end of the wing that on some aircraft go up rather rapidly and some aircraft don't. Let's go back to that one. You can see how Boeing's winglets on their 767 are radically different from the A330. Okay, one of the best and biggest aircraft to fly the world is the Boeing 777. And the 777 is one of those remarkable aircraft that has been enormously successful because the few that have moved to an aircraft with 2 engines being able to fly all around the world. So it has enough fuel and enough range to be able to fly Australia, South America. Let's take a look at those. There's a 777. And the Airbus A350. There's not a lot of difference between the two. The difference is that the A350 is not even... But this is the reason that I have it in red, because it hasn't even been offered yet to the airlines. It's just about to come online. I mean, it's possible that within the last couple of weeks they might have made it available to the airlines, but they're testing it now. And so that was probably one of their early models that they produced and used it for testing purposes. They always put the colors of the airlines that first put their orders through. They usually put the colors of the airline on the initial test aircraft. And finally, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner doesn't have any competition. And here's where Boeing really came into play, because when Airbus decided to build the A380 with double decks, there were a lot of people that said to Boeing, hey, Boeing, you need to compete with Airbus and build yourself a double-deck aircraft. And Boeing said, no, we don't believe there's a market for the A380. We believe that it'll be a disaster. We're going to build something entirely different. A smaller one, but with more composite material, wings that are similar to a glider wings, but they will be highly fuel efficient. And I have to tell you, to give you an update on what's happened today in the industry, it's true. The A380 has been literally a disaster. They've shut down the freighter line. They didn't sell a single one in the freighter category, the conversion to freighters. And a number of airlines have already canceled their orders for the 380. So the 380, unfortunately for Airbus, has been kind of a monumental and enormously expensive mistake. So here's the Dreamliner, and I want to point out the fact that the wings are so unique. You'll never see another airliner out there today with wings like that are tapered from the wing root all the way out to the tip. That kind of a taper. The other thing that you're going to see is, you can probably see it a little bit in this version, the wings bend a lot because they're made out of composite materials. They're made out of Kevlar and fiberglass and all the things that are light and highly efficient in terms of being aerodynamic. So let me show you what that bend up is. There's an example of how those wings bend up when it's in flight with a full load. It's really hard to believe that you're flying along in those wings, but you can look out the cabin window when you're taxiing on the ground and the wings are flat out, right? Then as you take off and start adding G-forces, the wings come up. Very much like a glider. We have happens all the time in glider flying, where a glider will take off, or he'll come in for a high-speed run, then pull up, and the wings bend up like that. But this is the first airliner ever to have been made that way, with wings that bend that much. It was a great achievement by Boeing. Yeah. No, need more than that? I doubt it. I suspect that it might in turbulence. When you're in turbulence, you're going to have a little higher bending. But you don't have to worry about it, because in the testing of the wings, they put it into a big hangar, and they put the wings in such a way that they bend and bend and bend until the wings break. They literally, everybody clears out, obviously, and they get behind concrete walls, but they'll bend those wings up until the wings snap. Then they'll record the amount of pressure and force that it took to bend those wings. And based on all the data they can get, there are no real serious turbulent eddies out there that would in any way bend the wings any farther than that. And as I recall, like 150 or 180% more than what they ever expect to occur in the skies. Extremely safe. Actually, and it turns out to be a smoother flight. Why? Because the turbulence that you run into, a lot of it is called light chop. The turbulence flexes the wings, but not the fuselage. The fuselage goes fairly smooth, and the wings are the things that flex up and down. That's not true of all the other airliners. This is just give you a quick idea. You don't have to worry about writing anything down with regard to these tables, because the tables themselves are a little complicated. What I want you to note is the fact that we have a column called list price. And the next table after this, I'm going to show you how much below list price most airliners, Airbus and Boeing, are sold at. So right now you can see the ranges. You see the ranges of like the 777, 747, This one's almost 8,700. It is the 777 X. 8,000. These are ranges that are more than sufficient to be able to get anywhere in the globe. Yeah. Why does what? So cheap? Well, first of all, it's smaller, much smaller, so it carries fewer passengers, right? I mean, look at the number of passengers. 330 compared to 410, 414, 575. Also, the materials themselves are less expensive than titanium and aluminum, right? And also less expensive to make. When you have aluminum and titanium, you have to have huge facilities in order to be able to put those fuselage sections together. What happens is with the fuselage itself on the 787, it's put into an oven and it's baked in an oven for some period of time. And then it's probably baked around the world, maybe in Italy or Japan. I know that a lot of the Boeing 787 is made in Japan. So here's the market prices, and look at the discounts. So take the A380. The list price is $432 million, and the market value, that is what people actually paid for that 380, is 45% discount from the list price. So that just gives you an idea of what goes on in the world of aviation and aircraft as far as the prices are concerned. So if somebody says, yeah, that Boeing cost $300 million, it's probably going to sell for $150 million, roughly 50% off. But, the manufacturers allow for that, right? They put the price up here because they know the price is going to be sold. What's going to be sold for is down here. Technology comparisons. They're very similar between the Boeing 737 and the A320. Very similar. If you saw the two of them side by side, even if you walked down inside the fuselage and walked along the row of seats, you probably wouldn't be able to tell whether you were in a 737 or an A320. So all you have to remember is there's a great similarity between those two aircraft. Now, there's a large difference between the Boeing 747 and the Airbus A380. Do you remember the difference I pointed out? What was it? The what? Yeah, the cabin. On the 747, the cabin only went by the first 1/4 or 1/3 of the aircraft. But the A380, it was completely double-decked. There's no comparison for the Boeing 787. There just isn't one out there that competes with it in terms of size and speed and, most importantly, fuel efficiency. Aha, now here's where the difference comes in between Boeing and Airbus. And we covered this in one of my previous lectures where I talked about the fact that Boeing relies on the pilot. Airbus relies on the computer. Now, you should definitely be taking those notes because that's a crucial issue, and it has, over the years, been a safety issue where I can name 3 major aircraft accidents that occurred as a result of the design philosophy of Airbus compared to Boeing. Okay, are the Airbus pilots simply computer operators? In many ways, the answer is yes. Why don't the Airbus crew members work together? Because their controls are separated. You can have the first officer doing something with his side stick controller, and you can have the captain doing something else. That was one of the accidents that occurred off the coast of Brazil in an A340, because the captain was trying to overcome the stall and the first officer was stalling it, and neither one of them knew what the other was doing. There was another one where it was coming into Orly Field in Paris. The computer said, "Oh, we're landing," but they were just going to do a flyby. for the show. There was a show at the field in Paris, hopefully to get orders for the A320. So as they were coming in, what looked like a landing, and it was like a landing, the captain said, okay, that's enough, we're low enough, we're going to go around. So he advanced the throttle. What did the computer do? It pulled the throttle back and said, oh, we're coming in for a landing. So it throttled back. And what happened to the aircraft? It hit the trees at the end of the runway and blew up, exploded in a ball of fire. So there are definitely significant differences between Airbus and Boeing, and a lot has to do with the fact that Boeing relies on the pilots, Airbus relies on the computer. Tomorrow I'll show you a couple of photographs that accompany this presentation, but for now, that's the end of this one. Okay, guys, wrap up, and we'll see you tomorrow afternoon.